right, everyone, welcome back. This is The Last Fence. I'm your host, DC, and we have here Mike B on the other side of the pond. Welcome back, Mike. It's a pleasure to chat with you again.
Likewise.
All right. Yeah. So how's things going on your end?
Things are a little bit crazy. I work a lot of jobs, but I do journalism still, and I've got an article I'm working on involving the Turning Point USA. They have a chapter here in Vermont, which is an oddity by its very nature. If you know anything about Vermont and or that organization, it's like trying to think of an analogy. It's like putting cookies in an omelet or something like that. It's not a natural mix, but I can explain more of that as we get into that story later. But it's beautiful weather, so there's that. Temperature's all right. And how about on your end of the pond?
Yeah, nice weather here as well. You know, got good things going here, and seems that there's a lot cooking up because of the Strait of Hormuz. And additionally, with the new PM in, there's a lot of scandals already breaking out. So we're just going to see how that pans out over the next few months. But yeah, other than that, I'm just chill, you know.
Yep.
Got myself a skimmer for today, so that way I can do some yard work. That's it.
I want to comment on something. So our listeners hopefully are starting to figure out we also do episodes on our own. I listened to your first solo episode for this channel. You have your own channel where you have more, but your first solo episode was on the economics of the Iran war. And I listened to it last night while I was on the treadmill or bicycle machine, whatever, stationary bike. And I gotta say, you really nailed it. I want our listeners to know you're like an oracle on this one, because you basically said, if our listeners could go back and listen to it after the show, you basically said there was a lot of buzz about them running out of missiles, running out of equipment, probably running out of money too. You talked about all of those things. And then very next day, all the headlines today are basically what you said, almost word for word, what's happening now. They've, as far as I understand it, and you can, get into this when you get into your part, but they're pausing the attacks on Iran for pretty much the very reasons that you talked about in your solo podcast. So I want listeners to know we're like the oracle over here. You listen to us, you get literally tomorrow's news today. So good job on that one.
Many thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, the writing's basically on the wall, as they say. And that comes from an old biblical account where they had the words "mene mene tekel parsin," which literally translates to "your house will be divided amongst the Persians." So very interesting way that's actually panning out now. We'll actually pull that up quickly, so that way we can take a look at exactly what's taking place for today. And that's news actually broke about 3 hours ago on Axios. And we're going to just share a little bit of that. So here we can see the article is the top U.S. military commander in the Middle East advised halting Hormuz bombing. So this is actually the U.S. military commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, and he's recommending stopping the bombing campaign around the Strait of Hormuz because what Axios wants to say, it has reached the limit of its effectiveness, which I think is absolute BS. So this is according to two
that's
sources.
The PR version of it for the public. They don't want to say the real reasons.
It doesn't make any sense. Reach the limit of its effectiveness. What does that mean? Have you taken out all, the targets? Have you effectively dismantled their ability to strike other countries? It doesn't seem to be the case because, they have been hitting a lot of the targets in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, even Saudi Arabia. To a degree of precision that the United States didn't really expect. But what we see here the U.S. military's Central Command, which is known as CENTCOM, and most of the, I guess all the alphabet soup agencies and such, together with other advisors, impacted President Trump's decision on Friday to pause U.S. strikes against Iran. And it was acknowledgement by both the military and civilian advisors to the president. Now, this is very important to note. There are limits to what can be accomplished through military action and specifically an air power campaign. Now, what did we say last time we met? We said that there are limited ability to do strikes on a country the size of Iran, or any country for that matter, to actually effectively change the dynamics of the military confrontation. So because they advised this to the president, this means that Trump had been pushing for this campaign all along, but now he's being forced to rein in his kind of mad ambitions by the military wing and the civilian advisors, because they're not seeing things the way that he sees. Trump is in his own little world at this moment, and the military advisors who have experience with this kind of campaign understand that they are running low on all of their munitions. They're running low on fuel because they don't have access to the same fuel. The fuel has also been burnt out in many of the military bases. And according to Larry Johnson, I remember we mentioned him before, 16 of the 20 military bases in the MENA region, or in the Middle East region, have been completely decimated. So there's no fuel, no way to deploy troops, no way to get new munitions out there. Radars are completely, coughed up. So it's just a bit of a mad dash. What's your thoughts on that?
I was thinking of a documentary I saw about World War II, because I think there's some parallels, history repeating itself. A lot of people, I didn't know this about World War II, but I learned this later in life. Apparently, Germany didn't have a lot of oil for the whole war. That's part of the reason they went on that big African excursion to get all those countries in North Africa that they ended up losing about halfway through the war. But the way I understand it, after the initial invasion, I'm talking about D-Day, and when they were pushing eastward towards Germany, that's when Germany was really starting to run out of fuel. And a lot of people who really study these things say that Germany had superior tanks. The Tiger tank was stronger than the Sherman, etc., but they didn't have the fuel to keep them running. And many of them were literally deserted in battle, not because they were attacked or exploded or anything, but they just ran out of fuel. And it's hard not to think that here we are, almost 100 years later, well, about 80 years later, and history is repeating itself. The larger, stronger power, at least in some regards, I don't know that Germany was necessarily stronger at that point in the war, but they were running out of fuel, and that did not help them. So a little bit of historical context is my first thought. Didn't mean to go on a big tangent, but anyway.
No, you made an excellent point. Guess who they actually went out to try to get fuel from? They actually tried to strike a deal with Iran back in the day. So it was Persia back then.
Right.
He wanted to link them to the Aryans, like people of the Caucasus Mountains, which are a part of Iran, Iran's geography. So during that time, I think they wanted to try to reach out to Iran to get oil and, critical supplies, petrol supplies at that time. So when they pushed into the Eastern Front, they had the Battle of, Leningrad, the Siege of Leningrad and all of that, and Operation Barbarossa. That was when a lot of that really met its, came to a head because they didn't have the fuel or the supplies. A lot of the Italians that were going into, the Volga region, they were getting frostbitten, dying of exposure and all sorts of things. So it's a very interesting situation. The same thing would definitely happen here in Iran, I would assume.
Right.
So
well, also were the visitors, like, I know it seems like a minor detail, but think of like the sports analogy, the home team versus the away team. We're the away team. We're the visiting team. And unlike in Major League Baseball, where everything's otherwise mostly equal, it's a big deal because we got to ship everything literally all the way around the world just before we can even begin to enter the battle. And as you just alluded to, with the fuel and everything, that's the problem.
Definitely. One of the things I wanted to point out here, and again, we're working with Axios, so it's basically like the wing of, the administration, essentially. But we talked about, he said that CENTCOM commander said and a possible next step would be to resume major combat operations to finish the 20% of targets the US military designed, but didn't strike during Operation Epic Fury. So what are these targets they're hitting?
Mm-hmm.
And if they're striking targets, is the military campaign effective? Because it doesn't seem like Iran is abating at any way, shape, and form in their military strikes, because the Strait of Hormuz is closed now. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait is closed as well, thanks to the Yemenis. And then the Strait of Hormuz will be the last choke point to actually completely shut down everything. But even with those two, that's enough damage to block off critical supplies, even to Saudi Arabia, because they use Saudi Arabia actually uses the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to get most of its supplies. So it seems like it's a mess, and I don't think that they have a proper strategy to actually resolving this. Well, not even resolving this. They don't even have the ability to wage war. I'm just going to flat out say it.
Right. I wouldn't be surprised to see a 2.0 of the Memorandum of Understanding. Only this time, I think it's going to be, they're just going to announce it. Here's what I think is going to happen. The U.S. is going to announce it as a victory. They're going to say we achieved all. They're already saying that. They're saying basically the attacks have reached the limit of their effectiveness, or whatever their own words were. And they're going to say we won, because they have to say we won, whether we actually won or not. I mean, obviously it looks like we lost, but they don't care. They're going to tell everybody that we won. And then they're going to sign, the deals. And it's probably going to be even more disadvantageous to the U.S. than the first Memorandum of Understanding was. But I think at this point, we just got to cut our losses. And I saw a headline over at, well, it's no longer called InfoWars. It's just alexjones.com, alexjoneslive.com. A leaker from the White House allegedly said that Trump is basically panicking and or breaking down behind the scenes. And he is desperate for an exit ramp for this whole conflict. And why he doesn't just take that exit ramp, I don't know exactly why. I think we talked a little bit in our prior episode about Israel and how they keep fudging it up by basically doing their own thing. And I believe the Iranians have even said in their own words, more or less, that they don't think Trump is running the show. He might be the man in the driver's seat, but the ones who are actually driving are somebody else. So maybe it's Israel. But
Two words.
I know that. Yeah. 2 words. What are they?
Yeah. AIPAC's the first one. Second one, midterms.
Yeah. Well, if you want to win the midterms, you would think you want that exit ramp. That's my way of thinking. I mean, this is the first. The Iran war was the straw. Well, I don't know if I'd call it a straw, more like a giant log, but it definitely broke MAGA's back as far as its like relentless support for Trump. I believe at a principled level that MAGA had a lot of great value: free market, free speech, non-interventionalist overseas. That was the big one that they obviously gave up on. And I think before that, you saw some of the writing on the wall. They weren't really going after the Epstein files like they initially advertised that they would. So there were a couple of disappointments that had already occurred. But the one that really has MAGA split and or kind of abandoning Trump is the war. So
definitely. Before we continue, your video has actually gone to the side.
That's what I was going to ask you the same thing. Oh boy.
Yeah.
All right, there
you go. Yeah, just keep it there. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonder if we'll be able to edit that. Probably not, but whatever.
It should be okay.
Live video.
But you mentioned something about the MAGA base. Some of that is actually, you could say it's pretty much linked to Turning Point USA. So would you like to talk a little bit about your topic as well? I'll pull that up for the audiences.
Okay. So I interviewed 2 sophomores at a local high school here in Vermont. I'm in Vermont. This is I'm near Montpelier, the capital of Vermont. And now your video just okay, you're switching the article, I see. All right, in any case, So I am chatting to everybody from north central Vermont near Montpelier, which is the state capital. And about a town over is Barry, Vermont, and they have a school, a high school, Spalding High School, and two teenagers, Seth Fewer and Javian Kastner. They are the two fellas in that video that's on your screen right there. Now, the article that because I'm writing an article about these two kids currently, like not this moment, but tonight, tomorrow, until it gets published for the VermontDailyChronicle.com, if people want to check that out. But the article I sent you is from about a year ago, so they're freshmen in that video. But the essence of their situation hasn't changed very much over the course of a year. And what I meant at the beginning of the show by they're kind of like a cookie and an omelet, what I meant by that was they are, I mean, it's no secret, Turning Point USA is kind of MAGA flavored. Officially, they're nonpartisan. That's the official line. And they do an admirable job when I talk to them about keeping to that in the sense that they don't advocate for specific policies outright, other than generally supporting a free market, free speech, no compelled speech, a general free society. They're like kind of a libertarianish slant, if you'd like to call it. But officially, they're nonpartisan. And in Vermont, anybody who knows anything about Vermont and the U.S., people jokingly call it like mini California, or it's like Maine, or it's like Washington State. It's basically deep blue. I would argue it's turning a lot more purple lately, but that hasn't shown up in the elections, and I have some theories about that, which I'll save for another episode. But for all intents and purposes for this episode, let's just assume that it is still deep blue, because that's its reputation anyway. And it's definitely got a strong left-leaning aspect. And by that, I mean, try to imagine you're a teenager, you're growing up in Vermont, you've got, you know, all the challenges of being a teenager in general, like you're learning how to be a young adult, you're learning how to do critical thinking, you're learning how to be a man or a woman, but you're still like kind of a kid, but you're not really, and you're like growing up. Now try to imagine you're basically doing like political activism, frankly. And try to imagine, and not only you're doing political activism, you're doing political activism like you're like over enemy territory, behind enemy lines. I'm not saying we're enemies, but metaphorically speaking, behind enemy lines, surrounded by everybody who pretty much hates you or doesn't want you to be doing what you're doing. That's what these two kids are doing. These kids, and it's actually in this article, I believe. We don't have to read it, but for people who want to check that out, they've gotten threats of violence against them. They've been called all kinds of names. They've been ridiculed. They've been called, you know, Nazis and fascists. When I was interviewing them, somebody flipped them off that was walking by because we were at a festival. These kids really got a spine. They got a backbone, and they're going to be very strong-willed adults early in life, because they are basically doing something, whether you agree with them or not politically, as far as like the slant of their politics. You got to give them credit. They are really standing up for their beliefs in a hostile environment and doing it at a very young age. You can only imagine, it's already challenging to be popular in high school when you're not trying to be a political activist on like the minority spectrum. Like this is not Tennessee or Florida or the Midwest, where they might be in friendlier territory. This is blue Vermont. They have been called probably every name in the book as far as slander from the left-wing politics. And I really, really give them credit. And the article details how normally you would get the high school to formally sign on as having a chapter with Turning Point USA. Every teacher in the high school that they asked to do that said no. They all gave different reasons, but they all said no. And the school has been actively censoring everything they try to do. So they're not getting support from their teachers. They're not getting support. They do have some peers that help them. They're not completely alone. I mean, there are conservative. I don't even like using the word conservative because I think that carries too much baggage. But freedom, free speech, free markets, libertarian-minded people. They have. I know they have some of that help here in Vermont. They do exist. They're the minority, unfortunately. And I'm not saying that we need to be right wing or left wing, but for these two, they are definitely in a minority. So, do you have any questions or comments on any of that? I know that's a big mouthful.
Yeah, what I was going to do is actually just kind of play what they spoke about in the video.
Yeah, do that. So this is a year-old video, mind you, and I did not write this article. I'm not the one interviewing them, but I sent you this article because it's a great interview. So yeah, let's do that.
Cool. Let's go ahead and pull that up. And
I'm here with Seth and Javion, and they are part of the Barrie TPUSA chapter in the making. And I want to know, Seth, you're a freshman. What made you think about, hey, I want to start a TPUSA?
Well, obviously, we love getting more younger people involved in politics, obviously. And Turning Point USA has a great message, and they love to give it out to people. And so I like to spread that message, and it's really good for the community to know more about it.
Yeah. How about you, Javion?
Well, I originally heard about Turning Point from Seth, and I looked into it after he brought it up to me, and I discovered that I agreed with a lot of what it stood for and the importance of having it, especially in a community like this, where a lot of people might not feel like they're seen enough or heard enough.
What really stands out to you about TPUSA?
Well, when you think of, let's just say, political activists, on the Republican side, the main person you think of is Charlie Kirk, obviously. Charlie Kirk, he has great messages. He has a lot of great beliefs, I think, and he's just an overall great guy, and I'd love to, obviously help him out with whatever we can do,
So I think it goes without saying that was before Charlie Kirk was killed. But in any case, I think that interview was very shortly before that occurred. Maybe by weeks or a month.
Yeah, it's a bit tragic, that whole situation as well, because, I oftentimes find that you learn way more from people who share opposing views from you, because not only does it strengthen your own ability to debate rationally, but you can also learn different perspectives. And I think that's pretty much what Charlie Kirk was trying to do with his, with TPA in general. So when the other, the opposing side decides to resort to violence and it's celebrated on the internet, it just goes to show the depths that the liberal left have fallen. I used to be quite supportive of the liberal left, but the more I study history, I've found that, ironically, that, even when we talk about World War II, it was both the Nationalist Socialists and the Communists that despised the liberal left. And that's why Trotsky was kicked out. And additionally, that was also, why the, the Russian Social Democrats were also, kicked out as well. So it's a lot to say about the character and the nature of people who think in very unscientific, emotional terms when it comes to the way they debate people rather than doing things rationally. So it's just something that I think about oftentimes when I see these types of situations, appear in the media. When we talk about Charlie Kirk, we even look at the Ann Widdecombe's story that we talked about, a week or two ago, and it was a similar issue. The left-winger goes all the way from Rotherham, which is near outside of Sheffield, travels to Devon. He takes a hammer and bludgeons her to death with a hammer, 21 strikes. So this is the type of mentality that a lot of these people have, in the sense that not all of them, but there's an increasing majority, there's an increasing demographic of people who are willing to resort to planned out, premeditated murder in order to silence the opinion of someone that they, number one, disagree with, but additionally cannot argue logically with. So it's that emotional state that people reside in that is their biggest downfall. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
So one thing you just said a moment ago was it's great to try to engage with people who think differently than you, because it teaches us the skills, communication skills, reasoning, making a coherent argument while keeping our nerves steady, so it doesn't just devolve into like a screaming match or God forbid, a fight or violence. And I want to comment on when I was interviewing Seth. He was the first of the two students to speak in that video that we just played. I interviewed Seth yesterday. This is Seth Fewer. And we had some people, we were at a festival. So many people were around. They had a booth. People were visiting, asking them questions. The whole idea of their booth was to get people registered to vote. And they had some unfriendlies come in. Some people, again, deep blue Vermont, enemy territory, for metaphorically speaking, enemy territory. And there was one self-described socialist or communist lady who came in, and they ended up, having I would call it a constructive conversation. They were able to find a little bit of a middle ground around the notions of free speech and no compelled speech. I always say, like, who would be against free speech, or who would be for compelled speech? Compelled speech being obviously when you want somebody to believe something, you don't give them a choice. I would think that whether you're left wing, right wing, middle wing, far off in the cosmos, whatever, there's certain principles that ought to be, in an ideal world, there doesn't seem to always be the case, but they ought to be universal. And anyway, Seth, and there was another lady there, Renee McVelly, I might be saying that wrong. She's kind of like their the Turning Point USA representative for New York and Vermont. And they did a great job saying, okay, we agree with these values. We don't have to agree on whether we love Trump or the Iran war or whether men can have babies or whatever else, but they can agree that free speech and the right to say what you think and be ready to accept a response to that, hopefully not violence, but like, criticism or potentially being called names or whatever. That's what makes America great. So, if I may add just one more thing, I just want to add one more thing. I always share this funny. There's a really funny, my favorite quote about the First Amendment in all of history occurred in a really silly movie, Ghostbusters 2. Not the first one. They had Ghostbusters 2 came out in the late 80s. Bill Murray hated it, apparently. You'll kind of see why if you watch it. But the whole premise of Ghostbusters 2 is that there's this pink slime under New York City. And the pink slime is creating monsters and all this bad stuff that's happening in the city. And they finally figure out towards the end of the movie that the slime is reacting to New Yorkers treating each other badly. If you've ever been to New York, sometimes people are anxious, they're upset, they want to crowd into the subways, and then they're pushing and shoving, and it's not always the friendliest city in the world. But the mayor of New York at the end of Ghostbusters 2 has this brilliant quote where he says essentially every New Yorker has a God-given right to treat each other like shit. And I think that was meant to just be like a comedic line at the end of a silly movie about pink slime and Ghostbusters. But I think that really nails the First Amendment and the compelled speech doctrine, which is part of the First Amendment, to a T. We all have a right, every American or every free person in this world, to treat each other badly and call each other names. Yes, you can identify as the opposite sex. Yes, you can. The other people around that person have a right to say that's ridiculous. I think you're a blah blah blah. Everybody has a right to say their piece and be miserable to each other, if that's how they so choose. So
there's a lot of things to think about regarding the Constitution. I remember we had the conversation about constitutions, considering that the UK doesn't have a formal set written out constitution. It's an amalgamation of different laws and constructs that eventually form the basis for, democratic processes here. And it does kind of help to at least have things written out in a way that you can understand, like with the US Constitution or the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to that. And, there's not really any of that in the UK. So oftentimes there's been the issue, what we talked about with YouTube, the ability to give out independent journalism and media on YouTube is going to be curtailed here in the UK because of the new online safety bill, which goes against, in the United States, the right to free speech. But because there is no doctrine here in the UK, it is not really clear cut, even though people assume that they do have free speech.
Mm-hmm. That's a shocker to me. And I know I said that last episode too. I always thought that every modern country in the world has free speech, but it's really not true. We met in South Korea, and I guess Korea, everybody thinks, well, they're not North Korea, they're South Korea. They must be free and wonderful. And for the most part, they are. But as a journalist, I did write an article once for one of their English-speaking newspapers. And it wasn't even really critical of the South Korean government per se. It was just critical of a court decision regarding the murder of a U.S. citizen during the period where they were having the U.S. beef riots. I don't know if you remember this or if you were there at the time, but apparently there was a time in history when Korea was quite upset about their government importing a lot of U.S. beef because we have all these like antibiotics and crap in our food, and they didn't want it. So there was a lot of like anti-American sentiment at this time. And this poor kid got beat up and he was killed. And the court ruled the suspects innocent. And the mom contacted me to write an article about it and say, look, we have a lot of evidence that somebody in this group should have been convicted. And I wrote the article, and I just wrote, this is what the mom said, this is what the mom's lawyer said, blah blah blah. And the editor came back to me and they're like, no, we can't run this. And it didn't accuse me of getting anything wrong in the article. Their exact words to me, I believe, were, if you're not allowed to criticize the Korean government, the South Korean government, in this kind of way, you're not allowed to show them in a negative light. And they basically told me if we ran this article, I would risk getting arrested and or thrown in jail or whatever. This is all like more than 10 years ago. So I will not, I just want to say that as a disclaimer. Maybe things have changed, maybe they haven't changed, I don't know. But I do know that not every country in the world has unlimited or unrestricted free speech. So
yeah, I mean, the thing is that, and this is another thing I think about with the US Constitution. It was written at a time with completely different material guidelines or conditions. So, for example, back in the days of 1776, remember the flag that we use for our background is actually the US constitutional flag, like the continental flag. So that was used between the years 1775 and 77, when the Republic was just getting started. And it's essentially, the US is just really an extension of the East India Trade Company, where a lot of the stuff they took was from the time of George III. And things have changed dramatically since then. We didn't contemplate big industry like we did now, not to the same level or the same speed of information being spread across the world. So I think that those who own the means to be able to distribute that information or to disseminate information, those are the ones that have the monopoly on that, plus state force. So you see, wherever force is applied, the one who wields the hammer is actually the one who has the power in that society. So it's something to think about. It could be government, it could be corporations, it could be non-state actors, but it just really depends on where it's coming from.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that it's 2026 and there's still so many parts of the world where this continues to need to be a discussion, but it is. And even in the US, it's still a discussion. We have I feel like if certain powers within the U.S. had their way, they would. Well, the Iran war is a perfect example, because even those on the conservative Republican side, the ones that were like hardliners in support of Israel, I believe some top figures in the U.S. were suggesting that if you criticized Israel, they were certainly calling you anti-Semitic. And again, free speech. They have a right to say whatever they want. But they were trying to say, some of them were trying to go further and say you should be arrested or banned from whatever if you criticize Israel. And that's obviously crossing the line in my book. And I don't think that should be personal politics. That I feel like that should just be an ideal that everybody holds, is you should have the right to criticize.
Yeah, I remember there was a statement. I remember Ben Shapiro's been getting a lot of shit these days for his comments coming out. He's come out as basically a Zionist shill in many ways, in the sense that he is supporting all of the Israeli and American military actions in the Middle Eastern region. And he made a quote, as paraphrased, is that, we understand that there are a lot of Americans dying for Israel at this particular point in time, but essentially we want to just go ahead and finish this up so that we can win. And I was just thinking to myself, it's like, you're perfectly okay with sending men and women to die for a foreign power, which has in the past spied on you and additionally poses a security threat many times. And I don't want to say too much about it, but all I can say is that these ideologically driven wars, no one needs to die for these. We need to start living for things that matter to ourselves. I appreciated Trump doing the America First policy when he first, launched his 2024 campaign. And had he stuck to that, I think he'd be in a much better position for the midterms than he is.
Yeah.
So yeah, just to wrap things up, is there any closing statements, best guess for about 30 seconds, that you'd like to make?
Oh, I just can't believe we're still dealing with wars in general in this world. I think of social media, I think of international travel, and I think I have friends who are Russian. I have friends who are Israeli. I don't have friends from Iran or Palestine. But if I did, I easily could. I feel like in this world, if you get around enough. So it's just ridiculous to me. That might have been 30 seconds.
No, that's good. I mean, for me, all I can say is that I'm glad that we still have the ability to at least disseminate our messages and our ability to talk about these things rationally and, with the experiential data. So things that we can actually prove, things that are sourced, and then debate logically about it. I never want to be in a position where I'm caught so much in my emotions that I can't see the truth. And I think that there's a lot of that polemic going around where just everything, including discourse, goes down to ad hominem attacks, like you're such and such because you're a fascist, you're a Nazi, or you're a bigot or racist, or things like that. I really wish people would get back to common sense. But yeah, that's going to be it. We're just going to wrap it up with those two. I think those are really two good conversations. So once again, everyone, this is Last Vince. This is DC here, Mike B, hanging out on the other side of the pond in Vermont. It's a pleasure to have everyone here. Again, if you like what you see here, always be sure, comment below, send messages, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And also, just let us know what you think about the state of the world. And thank you so much for joining us for today. We're going to wrap it up here. But until next time, speak your mind, defend the truth, and keep your sanity. Bye now.
Bye.